So this is one of my favorite pictures in the DPLA. If it's actually one of the pictures we use on the homepage, if you've been to our homepage. It's from the Massachusetts Historical Society, and I love this early image of this boy jumping. We don't have a whole lot of metadata. We don't know a whole lot of contextual information about the image, but I just think it's pretty awesome. So I love to start with this excitement because we were certainly excited to you stopped the music. We were certainly excited to launch just this April of this past year. So we've been going for, I guess, a little over 6 months. Oh no, they're back. So I'm going to talk about the 3 Ps of the DPLA. So DPLA as a portal, a platform, and a public option. And I'm going to unpack all of those for you so you can kind of learn more about what I mean by all these pieces. I think the portal is easy, and then we'll go from there. So obviously the portal is our website where you go to search across these collections that we've brought together in the Digital Public Library of America. This is what the website looks like. We have some featured images up top. You can search across the library, which searches across the metadata. You can view exhibitions. You can actually view items on a map if the metadata actually allows that. So if there is actually geographic information in the data that we get, we can place those items on a map. The same thing with the timeline. If there's date information, we can place those items in a timeline. We also have some featured apps, as well as kind of regular news feed and those kinds of things that we keep up to date. We recently hit the 5 million item mark, so we have actually about 5.2 million items, I think, as of this morning when I was looking. We are constantly refreshing data, so our partners, as they add new data, we have a regular refresh cycle, so as they add new data, we add new data to the DPLA. So we're now about 5.2 million items and growing steadily. So this is simply what the search interface looks like. So here I did a search for Chicago, and I got a little over 77,000 results in the DPLA for the term Chicago. And this is what it looks like. You can see on the left there are facets where you can limit, you can collapse those if you'd like. If you'd like to see certain ones, you can just see certain formats. You can see certain institutions who contributed, and you can go down and you get subject information and things like that as well, data information, as you browse down the facet list. You can also browse via map. So I mentioned that if data comes to us with geographic information, that is going to be a loose term. Geographic information often has let's say county level information we might just get a state, we might get a city and a state, we might actually get points on a map, we might actually get latitude, longitude. That is more rare from our partners than it is just a city, state, those kinds of things. So depending on the level of granularity, we actually then take that data and we put it up against things like geonames.org. We actually have a couple of places where we go and then we return a spot on the map. So I'm just zooming in a couple levels here. So when you get down, the zoom levels kind of increase, and if you're zooming in, and so I live in North Carolina, kind of right on that North Carolina, South Carolina line right there. So there's several objects from because both of those states are currently participating. One of the other ways to browse is via the timeline. So this is simply a browse for, I didn't do a search for anything. I just looked at the timeline, and anything that actually has a date in it is going to appear here. So I just did a timeline browse. The year 1838, we have close to 14,000 items from that date. So you can click on that and you can scroll through all 14,000 items if you'd like. You can actually do a search. So I did a search for Montreal up here. So we are getting data from only U.S. institutions at this point, but that doesn't mean that the data is only about the U.S. So we clearly have data that's about Montreal. So we have 1,900 results for Montreal. I looked at 1838 again, and 5 of those items from that previous list are actually about Montreal. And here you can see, once you click on those items, you can see what those items are. So all 5 would kind of appear here in the middle, and you can just scroll up and down and see these various items. So this is just another way to browse the collection by date. One of the other ways to browse the collection is through the exhibitions. So our partners actually, before we launched, worked to build exhibitions using the Omeka platform that some of you may be familiar with. We had a centralized Omeka instance, so we're not actually aggregating from anyone at this point. We hosted it at DPLA and built templates, and the people populated the templates based on categories of expertise and collections. So, for example, activism in the U.S., the folks at the Digital Library of Georgia built that exhibition, and if many of you may know that they have the award-winning Civil Rights Digital Library at the Digital Library of Georgia, the University of Georgia, and they took a lot of the data from the Civil Rights Digital Library and built this wonderful exhibition on history of activism in the U.S. And several of our partners just kind of went through and based on their collections, based on topics that we went through that were significant in U.S. history, we had partners create these exhibitions. We're working on more of them now. More partners are going to build exhibitions in the future. So we think this is, we know based on our stats that these get a lot of use. People love the context, they love the stories around, and they actually love the full images where we're just bringing in the metadata and the thumbnails right now into DPLA. This actually has full images, streaming video, streaming audio. So the exhibitions do get a lot of use. This is one on national parks, parks and public spaces done by South Carolina. So where do we get all this stuff from? So we have 2 types of hubs. We call them content and service hubs. And these are partners. I'm sorry, that font is so tiny. When you have an 11-inch MacBook Air, doing screenshots is kind of a nightmare. So they range from HathiTrust, which is almost 1.7 million items, to the Harvard Library and all in between. So lots of different partners, and they're coming in 2 ways. So the content hubs are institutions who have one-to-one relationships with the DPLA. So they're large data providers. Our threshold, you'll see that this is not true of some of the initial institutions that gave data to the DPLA when we were first getting started, but we've set a threshold of at least 250,000 items, so 250,000 metadata records that resolve to digital objects. So not just metadata records, but metadata records that resolve to digital objects. You have to have that in order to have a one-to-one relationship. And so that involves obviously large institutions, like 2 of the institutions that we'll be talking today, both the Smithsonian and Art Store are in this category. They have a significant amount of data that they are contributing to us, and we have a one-to-one relationship with them. We also have relationships with our service hubs. So our service hubs are aggregators of content. So right now we are working with service hubs based on geography because that is largely these aggregators already existed before the DPLA existed. People have been aggregating at the state level for a long time, aggregating metadata. Sometimes they have centralized repositories, sometimes they have distributed repositories. It really depends on a state-by-state situation, but in general, most of these folks have been operating for a number of years aggregating metadata. So really we were just wanting to build off these existing frameworks and I think leverage infrastructure as well as expertise here. I will make note that we just added 3 new service hubs. They're the Empire State Digital Network, the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center, and the Portal to Texas History. Of those, 1 did not exist, and that is the Empire State Digital Network. So New York never had a true statewide aggregation where they were pulling data from multiple sources. They had pockets. They have different pockets. So they had like a Content DM install in one part of the state where they actually aggregated from a number of institutions. They had another install here that was Fedora-based. They had 3 or 4 different collaborations and aggregations, but they never came together to aggregate that data. So what's happening in New York is actually the Metro Collaborative that some of you may be familiar with in the city is actually taking the lead and is building an aggregation statewide, pulling in all these different pockets that exist into one centralized stream, if you will, metadata, which will feed directly to the DPLA. Interestingly, they are not building a portal to this data. They are simply going to aggregate the data and feed that to DPLA and let DPLA service the portal. And if they want to get something back, just get it back through our API. So this is a kind of new way to think about forming a collaboration, a service hub, when it didn't exist previously. So that's the way New York is going about building their statewide aggregation. Question? So it's just getting started in New York, so it's really hard to say. I think it's really going to depend on people and resources, honestly. One of the things that happened in New York is they actually voted to fund positions, so to the tune of several $100,000 to fund a number of positions to actually do this work at the Metro Collaborative. And so I think where people don't have that kind of funding, that may not work because obviously the massaging of the metadata is laborious. And so I think that is really the key there in New York. So I think we'll see. I've certainly been talking to a number of states about forming these collaboratives or forming these aggregations, and that's come up a number of times. Well, what if we don't want a portal? What if we just want to push the stuff to DPLA, and how do we handle that? So this is just kind of to explain that it would be pretty impossible for us to actually manage one-to-one relationships with every institution in the country, every cultural heritage institution in the country with direct feed. So this is why we kind of have this model of aggregation levels or direct content relationships depending on the size of your institution. So it's one that we're trying to help support, and that may not be just geography. So I want to make a suggestion that we think about our aggregations not necessarily always based on geography, but maybe around content types, maybe around types of data. Who knows? Maybe it's on systems we use. All of us use a common system, and it's easy to aggregate data from that system. I think thinking about aggregations, I think would be. I would love to have some fruitful conversations about what that might look like besides geography. I think geography is a natural way to go in the U.S., but I think it could leave some gaps, and it could we could also think about ways to get data in quicker with other kinds of collaborations. All right, so what's in there now? So you can see this is a pie chart of what kind of data we have in the DPLA now. So most of our data, 30% is actually coming from college and university libraries. We have about 10% from archives, about 15% from public libraries, about 12% from museums, 11% from historical societies. So there's a decent amount of I guess, distributed kind institution types here, but we'd certainly love to see this more distributed, including more museum representation in the DPLA. One of our partners, I think this is a really interesting statistic for people pondering why do this? Why is this important to me, to my institution? So Minnesota Reflections is one of our partners. They're an aggregator, statewide aggregator in Minnesota. And their traffic is up 55% since they joined the DPLA. Over 1/3 of their visits actually come from the DPLA. And they're getting 62% more unique visitors over last year. They can, through our stats and their stats, they can tell that all of that is it's direct correlation coming from DPLA. And I think that is that's just one testament as to why it's important. They're getting tons of traffic. They're also getting a lot of people in the state of Minnesota who weren't necessarily a part of their initial collaborative, knocking on the door and saying, can we please join your collaborative because we'd like to get our data exposed at this national level. So I think there's a lot of positive coming out of these kinds of aggregations. All right, so the other P, platform to build upon. Free data. All right, so all the metadata that comes into the DPLA is CC0. It's under a CC0 license. So when people contribute, they agree to contribute all their data as CC0. So one of the things you can do if you were a mind to is download it all. If you want to play with metadata, you can have at it. You could just download one institution at a time and do some analysis of metadata if you'd like. So you can certainly play there. You can also get at it through the API, but you can just do a bulk download if you'd like. So where are we going with some of this data? So we're working right now to actually do some linked open data trials with some of our partners. So we pull all of our data in and we use what's called the DPLA Metadata Application Profile. We map the data to that. It's largely built on the Europeana data model, if you're familiar with the Europeana data model. There are a few nuances that are different that kind of needed to be different for us. But largely the classes are you can see where we actually don't change the names. If it's an EDM class in the data model, we call it EDM in the DPLA metadata application profile as well. So you can see where they're the same. Questions?
Did you have challenges with ingestions, same as Europeana had, or that was a problem that was solved at the state aggregators level? And did you have to use a tool like Mean?
So we don't use Mint. So we have tried Mint a little bit, but we don't use it. It didn't work for us the way we wanted it to work. So right now what we're doing, and I really think it's not 100% sustainable for the future, but so Europeana requires everybody to use OAI in order to aggregate data. So we don't. So we have some of our partners that contribute to us using OAI PMH, others that give us a data dump, like the Smithsonian. They just give us a large XML file and we parse it out and we deal with it. So depending on the institution, we do different things. We work with the partners to do the mapping. So Amy Rudersdorf, who's the assistant director for content, who works with me, she is our metadata guru and does the initial mapping in conjunction with the partners. So I think you're probably going to talk about this quite a little bit in your presentation, because the Smithsonian actually has their own data model, so very different than a lot of other institutions. And so the mapping had to be a kind of a back and forth situation where we have to kind of talk through the different mapping depending on what institution. So if the institution uses simple Dublin Core, qualified Dublin Core, or mods, something like that, even though people use different flavors of mods, we can work and do a generic map, but then we have to get down to back and forth when it's a specific data model. So we have a slightly different model than Europeana does. All right, so what we're doing, so we're starting a trial where we're just simply going to use URIs. So we store the data in a JSON LD data store. So all of our metadata is stored in JSON LD at this point. And what we're going to do is just start using URIs. So here's an example, some nasty subject headings. Right now we run a lot of normalization scripts when we get the data. So I'm sure all of you have dealt with data, whether or not it has spaces. These subject headings are wonderful because people will put space, dash, dash, or they'll one big dash, or, you name it, every variant that you can think of. Yes, we come across it. So wouldn't it be lovely if all that was normalized and we could just point to a URI? So that's where we're trying to go, and we're working with a number of our partners who are capable of kind of doing that right now, and we're gonna move in this direction hopefully soon. So hopefully improving data quality as we work with our partners. I mentioned this a little bit already, so I'll kind of skim over it. But so we work with Europeana to develop the DPLA metadata application profile. You'll find tons of similarities between the two. One of the things we're working on right now is Europeana actually has 12 right statements that they map to the EDM rights field. So. And they are actually going through a campaign right now where the 30 million objects that they have in their database, they're actually going back and trying to get appropriately rights labeled so that people know. So this is one of the things we want to do. Luckily, we only have 5 million so far. So hopefully it won't be such a pain to go back and do. But we want to appropriately label whether something is in the public domain, whether it has a Creative Commons license, whether it's rights restricted, whether it's rights unknown, those kinds of things. So standard rights statements so that users actually know and that those rights are actionable so that we can actually have a facet. You can say, I only want to see things that are in the public domain, and you only get items that are in the public domain, those kinds of things. So that's one of the things that we're working with our partners on right now, and we're working with Europeana. Europeana doesn't have a statement about fair use because there is no fair use doctrine in Europe. So we're talking about adding some sort of fair use statement here in the US where that wouldn't be used in Europe, but it would still be on the set that you could choose so that it would be universal across so that when we share data back and forth that the right statements are the same. All right, so we have an open API. One of the cool things that people have done is use it. We actually get tons more hits on our API than we actually do our portal, which we love that stat. So one of the apps that's been built is an iOS app called OpenPix. You can actually. You see there's a number of sources that they're pulling data from here. But this is just a simple search for Kentucky, and you can see images that are tagged in some way that have the word Kentucky in them that are found in the Digital Public Library of America. Again, this is on your iPhone. If you scroll over, you actually get metadata about the images, so you can kind of see where they came from, the title of the image, those kinds of things. Another cool app built is called Culture Collage. It's also an iOS app. This is just a simple search for the word ballet, and it kind of creates a collage of ballet imagery in the DPLA. This is another app that was built. So we've held a couple of hackathons and app fests around the U.S. And we held one in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that we actually had about 100 hackers at, which was pretty cool. And there's another one coming up being held at the American Library Association meeting in January. So we're having hackathon day there. The DPLA is just going to be one of the data sets that you can hack on, but one of the things that was built out of these hackathons is this really cool thing. So those of you who may be from the southern United States know that we really like our counties. We're very county identified, like where, who's next to you, what county did you grow up in. So I'm just highlighting a couple of states here to show data that we have from all the counties. This was just created an app that was created at one of the fests. So if you scroll over, I actually highlighted the county that I live in North Carolina, which is all the way down there at the bottom by the ocean, and we have 758 records from that county, which is really cool. And you can kind of do that with your state and your county if you'd like. So it's pretty neat. And the last P, strong public option. So I think we're all familiar with our library buildings walking in, our institutions walking in and walking out with materials. And now I think that tends to be a little bit more of a challenge now that things are electronic and we're getting them on what my boss Dan likes to call black boxes. He also, if you know Dan Cohen, he's a writer and he's a historian and has written a number of books. He likes to joke that they're not necessarily the most popular books in the world. And so he says that zombies will roam the planet before his books are in the public domain because it takes so long for your books to actually be released in the public domain. And so one of the things the DPLA wants to do is hopefully be a place to push that conversation a little bit. We want to work with folks. We're already talking to some university presses, for example, who are willing to release their books to us to serve up some full text materials to serve up online. And I think we'll do more of that as we move forward. There's a group called Library License, librarylicense.org. This is just one example of these kinds of things going on. But one of these, what this does, and I've had a question a number of times, is how is this different than Creative Commons? What's different about it is that authors can actually give their rights over to libraries. They can grant their full digital rights after a period of embargo or not. And they're also potentially able to grant their rights to the DPLA. This is a concept coming out of Harvard. Some of you may be familiar with, and so there are lots of folks working on this. And like I said, there are many other projects like this that are out there. But this is just one that we're involved in. Projects like Unglue It, where you can certainly you can sign in, you can pay to release some of these copies as CC BY. So some of these materials have already been released, and you can read them. Some of you may. Sorry. Some of you may know that this is my crazy idea. So what I'd love to do, years ago, I was working in North Carolina. I won't tell you how many, surveying cultural heritage institutions. So every historical society, museum, library, archive, we physically went to the doors of every one of them. It took us almost 5 years to do. And we were doing a survey about collections care and what kind of collections people had, what kind of shape they were in. We also were asking about collections you might want to digitize at that point. One of the things that struck me when I was doing the survey is there's so many rich collections that need to be exposed that were never going to be exposed at these small institutions without some help. And many of them weren't willing to let those collections leave the building, for sure, because that was what they knew, right? That was the reason for existence. And so my crazy self said, we need to go up there with a Winnebago and we need to, camp out until we get this stuff digitized. We need to put some scanning equipment on these things, call East Coast Customs or Pimp My Ride or some show like that, and get the appropriate shocks and get this thing going. And so it was a crazy idea. It didn't happen back in the day, but so when the DPLA first started, John Palfrey at the Berkman Center found out about this idea through a friend of mine and loved it and said, oh, we need to do this with the DPLA. And so anyway, we're very hopeful to actually do projects like this where we can get out into the community. It might not be quite this deluxe. It might be more low budget, but this is my dream. I actually have it sketched out on lots of napkins and, all the hydraulics and things like that. So, all right. So I'm just going to conclude here real quickly. So in conclusion, the DPLA is a national network with local impact and global reach. with the 3 Ps here. So the town of Morris, Minnesota, it's a tiny little town. It has about 5,000 residents. So it's a little spot on the map. Some of us may have grown up in towns like that. I did. Actually, less than 5,000 people. So if you zoom in here, you see Morris on that little crossroad. The 36 actually covers the word Morris here. So you can see the 36 items we actually have that are from Morris, Minnesota in the DPLA. What we'd really like to do is kind of fill in this map around Morris, Minnesota. We want to get out to these small institutions and bring this data into the DPLA and get this data exposed. We just got a $1 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to actually do this with public libraries in 4 of our current hub states. So we're going to go out and do some of this localized work with some of these small institutions in our hub states. Minnesota happens to be one of them. So hopefully we'll actually fill in some of those gaps around Morris. And the things that can happen when we do that is, these are the items in Morris, Minnesota, and then here's Morris, Minnesota on somebody's iPhone who never may have heard of Morris, Minnesota, and here they are finding great images about the history of Morris, Minnesota. So what can you do? If you want to get involved, there are lots of ways to get involved. I'm going to skip this video, but when you get a chance, there's a video on YouTube, and it's by the Minnesota Digital Library, and it talks about the importance of becoming a partner and why they are a partner in the DPLA, and they did it without us even knowing and said, hey, we did this really cool video. And so I think watching that would be cool if you're interested in participating. Another way you can participate is we just launched this community reps program where you could actually talk about the DPLA locally in your community. You could say, hey, yeah, I want to be a community rep. We'll send you cool stuff in the mail. And you can wear your DPLA t-shirt out and give out some stickers, which I have for people if you want some before I leave. But you can just talk about DPLA and what it is and why it's important. And so we actually launched this program at our DPLA Fest a couple of weeks ago, and we've had a great response. I think we have at least like 50 people who've already signed up and who want to be community reps across the U.S. And here's my email, and certainly follow us on Twitter if you want. So feel free to email me after this if you have any questions.